But my God, how mad I was to love you. What a fool I have been. You are nothing to me now. I will never see you again. I will never think of you. I will never mention your name. You don't know what you were to me once. Why, once. Oh, I can't bear to think of it. I wish I had never laid eyes upon you. You have spoiled the romance of my life. How little you can know of love if you say it mars your art. Without your art, you are nothing. I would have made you famous, splendid, magnificent. The world would have worshipped you, and you would have borne my name. What are you now? A third-rate actress with a pretty face? This is the harshest breakup I have ever read. I mean, honest to God, if you want to break up with somebody and crush their soul, leave this on their answering machine. Let's go back through that just to feel the effect again of what he had to say to her. Let's see. You have killed my love. You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity. Boom. You simply produce no effect. You have thrown it all away. You are shallow and stupid. My God, how mad I was to love you. What a fool I have been. You are nothing to me now. I will never see you again. I will never think of you. I will never mention your name. You have spoiled the romance of my life. How little you can know of love if you say it mars your art. Without your art, you are nothing. I mean, this is all some really, really harsh stuff, but it turns out that she stopped being artistic to Dorian, and as soon as she was no longer artistic, he didn't love her anymore. As soon as she wasn't a perfect representation of art, she was nothing to him. I think that's interesting and important because wait until you get to the end of this chapter. This chapter is very well constructed. It's got this parallel structure that's... Anyway, I'm gonna keep reading. A third-rate actress with a pretty face. The girl grew white and trembled. She clenched her hands together and her voice seemed to catch in her throat. You are not serious, Dorian, she murmured. You are acting. Acting. I leave that to you. You do it so well, he answered bitterly. Oof, that's brutal. She rose from her knees and with a piteous expression of pain in her face came across the room to him. She put her hand upon his arm and looked into his eyes. He thrust her back. Don't touch me, he cried. A low moan broke from her, and she flung herself down at his feet and lay there like a trampled flower. There's your flower imagery again, but this one's trampled. Dorian, don't leave me, she whispered. I am sorry I didn't act well. I was thinking of you all the time, but I will try. Indeed, I will try. It came so suddenly across me, my love for you. I think I should never have known it if you had not kissed me, if we had not kissed each other. Kiss me again, my love. Don't go away from me. I couldn't bear it. Oh, don't go away from me. My brother, no, never mind. He didn't mean it. He was in jest, but you, oh, can't you forgive me for tonight? I will work so hard and try to improve. Don't be cruel to me, because I love you better than anything in the world. After all, it is only once I have not pleased you, but you are quite right, Dorian. I should have shown myself more of an artist. It was foolish of me, and yet I couldn't help it. Oh, don't leave me, don't leave me! A fit of passionate sobbing choked her. She crouched on the floor like a wounded thing, and Dorian Gray, with his beautiful eyes, looked down at her, and his chiseled lips curled in exquisite disdain. There was always something ridiculous about the emotion of people whom one has ceased to love. Sybil Vane seemed to him to be absurdly melodramatic. Her tears and sobs annoyed him. Pause. Let's go back. What was it that Juliet said on the balcony that I asked you to pay attention to? It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which does cease to be ere one can say it lightens. Has Dorian's love for Sybil ceased to be? I think it has. Especially when, so suddenly too. There's always something ridiculous, he says, about the emotion of people whom one has ceased to love. So fast that, like, he ceases to love her and she seems ridiculous to him. I mean, that's... Also, that's true, right? You ever get a love letter from somebody who you don't love anymore? Like, asking for you to come back or whatever? It's so melodramatic and so ridiculous, and you're like, wow, why am I reading this? And yet it's clearly heartfelt for them. Go back. Find some breakup letter or something that somebody sent you and read it. And see if it still has the same meaning that it used to before, now that you're, like, emotionally beyond that moment. And I think you'll find that it doesn't. And you know, Oscar Wilde is spot on here. I am going, he said at last in his calm, clear voice. I don't wish to be unkind, but I can't see you again. You have disappointed me. She wept silently and made no answer, but crept nearer, her little hands stretched blindly out, and it appeared to be seeking for him. He turned on his heel and left the room. In a few moments he was out of the theater. Where he went to, he hardly knew. He remembered wandering through dimly lit streets, past gaunt, black-shadowed archways and evil-looking houses. Women with hoarse voices and harsh laughter had called after him. Drunkards had reeled by cursing and chattering to themselves like monstrous apes. He had seen grotesque children huddled upon doorsteps and heard shrieks and oaths from gloomy courts. He's in the bad part of town, right? This is the poor. And look at the way Dorian looks at them. Women with hoarse voices and harsh laughter, probably hoarse, calling after him. Drunkards cursing at him and chattering like monstrous apes. They're not even human. They're apes. They're subhuman, the poor. Grotesque children. That's not a way to look at poor kids and feel sorry for them. Oh, look at how grotesque they are. Anyway. As the dawn was just breaking, he found himself close to Covent Garden. The darkness lifted and flushed with the faint fires. The sky hollowed itself into a perfect pearl. Huge carts filled with nodding lilies trembled slowly down the polished, empty street. Pause. We could talk about lilies for a second. The language of flowers. Look it up on Wikipedia. It's a real thing. Lilies are for funerals. When we first saw Sybil Vane on stage, she was swaying like a lily or had the hands of a white lily, something about that. That's a death flower. I didn't want to say anything to give you, I guess foreshadowing or whatever for the death of her acting career. But now we have lilies, carts full of lilies going to the farmer's market, Covent Garden. And it all works together. Let's see. The air was heavy with the perfume of flowers, and their beauty seemed to bring him an anodyne for his pain. He followed into the market and watched the men unloading their wagons. A white-smocked carter offered him some cherries. He thanked him, wondered why he refused to accept any money for them, and began to eat them listlessly. They had been plucked at midnight, and the coolness of the moon had entered into them. A long line of boys carrying crates of striped tulips and of yellow and red roses defiled in front of him, threading their way through the huge jade-green piles of vegetables. Under the portico, with its gray sun-bleached pillars, loitered a troop of draggled, bareheaded girls, waiting for the auction to be over. Others crowded round the swinging doors in the coffee house in the piazza. The heavy cart horses slipped and stamped upon the rough stones, shaking their bells and trappings. Some of the drivers were lying asleep on a pile of sacks. Iris-necked and pink-footed, the pigeons ran about picking up seeds. Even the pigeons are floral. I think that's... well. Also, let's go back to Lord Henry. What did he say? To cure the soul by means of the senses and the senses by means of the soul. Dorian's having physical experiences, and that's how he's curing the sadness of his soul or whatever for what he did to Sybil. And flowers constitute most of them. Uh-oh. My battery is dying, so I'm hoping that we can do this without my phone shutting off. But if it does, I will see what I can do. So give me just a second there. I'm hoping that's going to take us through. My cord is not working very well. Being a teacher means you don't have a ton of technology. It's an iPhone 6, and the battery doesn't last long, and the cord doesn't stay plugged in. It is what it is. After a little while, he hailed a hansom and drove home. For a few moments, he loitered upon the doorstep, looking round at the silent square with its blank, close-shuttered windows and its staring blinds. The sky was pure opal now, and the roofs of the houses glistened like silver against it. From some chimney opposite, a thin wreath of smoke was rising. It curled, a violet ribbon, through the nacre-colored air. In the huge, gilt Venetian lantern, spoil of some doge's barge, that hung from the ceiling of the great oak-paneled hall of entrance, lights were still burning from 3 flickering jets. Pause again. This is Dorian's house or apartment in the city. The light that he has, the ceiling light, is the lantern off the barge of an Italian king. So we're going to get little descriptions here and there of Dorian's apartment. Stop and look at them and contrast it with where Sybil was living. You get the artistic nature of Dorian here and the opulence of his life and how he's chosen to surround himself with artistic and famous and storied things. Anyway. Sorry, I've said anyway like 100 times. Let's fix this. Lights were still burning from 3 flickering jets. Thin blue petals of flame they seemed, rimmed with white fire. He turned them out. and having thrown his hat and cape on the table, passed through the library toward the door of his bedroom, a large octagonal chamber on the ground floor that in his newborn feeling for luxury he had just decorated for himself and hung with some curious Renaissance tapestries that had been discovered stored in a disused attic at Selby Royal. That's his country house, Selby Royal. And he has an octagonal bedroom. Who wouldn't want to have an octagonal bedroom? As he was turning the handle of the door, his eyes fell upon the portrait Basil Hallward had painted of him. He started back as if in surprise. Then he went on into his own room, looking somewhat puzzled. After he had taken the buttonhole out of his coat, he seemed to hesitate. Finally he came back, went over to the picture, and examined it. In the dim, arrested light that struggled through the cream-colored silk blinds, the face appeared to him to be a little changed. The expression looked different. One would have said that there was a touch of cruelty in the mouth. It was certainly strange. He turned around and, walking to the window, drew up the blinds. The bright dawn flooded the room and swept the fantastic shadows into the dusty corners where they lay shuddering. That's some pretty heavy personification. But the strange expression that he had noticed in the face of the portrait seemed to linger there, to be more intensified even. The quivering, ardent sunlight showed him the lines of cruelty round the mouth as clearly as if he had been looking into a mirror after he had done some dreadful thing. Pause. That's a simile, but it's a pretty straightforward simile. There's lines of cruelty in the mouth of the picture. And it's like he's looking into a mirror after he's done some dreadful thing. Has he done a dreadful thing? That's my rhetorical question. Yes, I mean, clearly he has. He winced, and taking up from the table an oval glass framed in ivory cupids, one of Lord Henry's many presents to him, glanced hurriedly into its polished depths. No line like that warped his red lips. What did it mean? So he doesn't have any marks of cruelty on his face, only the picture does. And this follows a rhetorical question, what did it mean? But pause and look at a detail here. Oscar Wilde puts a fun little detail in here. He's got a little mirror that's surrounded by ivory cupids, and Lord Henry gave it to him. Now, that's a weird gift, an oddly romantic gift from Lord Henry to him, unless you stop and you analyze what's going on here. This is another narcissist joke. Maybe one time when Lord Henry's hitting below the intellect, Dorian looks into a mirror that shows him his own beauty, and the mirror is framed with cupids. So who is Dorian in love with? Himself, right? Like, so there's like this weird narcissist thing going on here. It's not maybe that Lord Henry loves Dorian, it's that Lord Henry is letting Dorian know, but over his head, that he's narcissistic and stuck on himself. He rubbed his eyes and came close to the picture and examined it again. There were no signs of any change when he looked into the actual painting, and yet there was no doubt that the whole expression had altered. It was not a mere fancy of his own. The thing was horribly apparent. He threw himself into a chair and began to think. Suddenly there flashed across his mind what he had said in Basil Hallward's studio the day the picture had been finished. Yes, he remembered it perfectly. He had uttered a mad wish that he himself might remain young and the portrait grow old, that his own beauty might be untarnished and that the face on the canvas bear the burden of his passions and his sins, that the painted image might be seared with the lines of suffering and thought, and that he might keep all the delicate bloom and loveliness of the then just conscious boyhood. Surely his wish had not been fulfilled. Such things were impossible. It seemed monstrous to even think of them. And yet, there was the picture before him, with a touch of cruelty on the mouth. Cruelty? Had he been cruel? It was the girl's fault, not his. He had dreamed of her as a great artist and given his love to her because he had thought her great. Then she had disappointed him. She had been shallow and unworthy, and yet a feeling of infinite regret came over him as he thought of her, lying at his feet, sobbing like a little child. He remembered with what callousness he had watched her. Why had he been made like that? Why had such a soul been given to him? Pause. So we see his avoidance of any kind of responsibility for this. Right off the bat, it was the girl's fault. And then instead of being like, I was bad, he's like, why had he been made like that? Why was I made like this? Why has such a soul been given to me? He takes zero responsibility. Obviously, Lord Henry gave him a soul earlier. I think that's interesting. During the 3 terrible hours of the play, that the play had lasted. He'd lived centuries of pain, eon upon eon of torture. His life was well worth hers. She had marred him for a moment if he had wounded